Episode 4 Warden and Colonial Medic Uniforms. Welcome back now, you lot. You're all deep in it now with this. This part we'll be looking into the uniforms of the underappreciated and humble frontline shirt crafters and salvagers, the Foxhole Medic. Like with many other subjects, the roles of these uniforms, frontline medical support and backline treatment matured into being in the background of our world's First World War, quietly gestating and growing in strength since the early 19th century. Medics have the role of saving who they can and providing comfort to the final moments of those they cannot, and in the case of the game, their small role keeps the soldiers fighting fit on the front line. So grab your doctor's bag and medical kit, and let's get stuck in and see what we have here. Warden's Physician's Jacket. Now we see the standard issue pack and belt pouches have been covered over with a clean white cloth and marked with what I like to call the universal game health symbol. The reason for this symbolism is obvious, but why a green cross instead of a red one? Previously in modern gaming, the Red Cross has been used to donate healing or HP mechanics up until the last few years, as it was assumed by many developers it was public domain. It is not, and game design has switched over to a green plus symbol now for these reasons. The Red Cross and Red Crescent too are both long-storied humanitarian organisations with a history dating back to the mid-19th century and have requested the symbol to not be used in fiction, especially in conflict-based video games for obvious reasons. Now this is not a history video about them, but I do suggest you look up their history as well, as it is quite fascinating. The Red Cross and Red Crescent too are both long-storied humanitarian organisations of a history dating back to the mid-19th century and have requested the symbol to not be used in fiction, especially in conflict-based video games for obvious reasons as well. This is not a history video about them, but I do suggest you strongly look up their history. It is honestly quite fascinating. Alongside this new marker on the pack are also two armed brassards, worn either arm by the Warden Medic as well, as another identification marker to both friend and sadly foe alike. Now, brassards have been around since the late 19th century, worn by NCO, junior officers and specialists either as a marker of the wearer's status or improvised stand-in for a uniform or rank badge that doesn't exist yet. However, at least in the Anglophile world, they have fallen out of fashion, both due to the association with certain fascist Austrian and his party, and either abolishing or professional establishment of the groups they once represented in modern militaries. Mounted on top of the Warden pack appears to be some sort of cylindrical tube. I assume this is where we keep the bandages whenever we're on medic duty. Speaking of unfortunate association, said tube looks very much like the Second World War German gas mask container which German soldiers adapted for other roles on the front line when the threat of gas being used had dried up. Unlike the Wehrmacht forces though, the Warden Army at least is smart enough to ensure this container is tampered down so it isn't rattling all over the place when the medic moves doing his job. And finally, attached to the bottom of the belt, the front, is a metal canteen, no doubt filled with brandy to steady the nerves of the wounded after being treated, as well as a crude sanitizer on the fly. Said canteen structure looks a lot like the British Army style canteens from the World Wars, without their felt cover. Attached to the leather belt of the carrying system as well on the hips are some cloth covered large bag pouches holding perhaps the blood vials themselves. Colonial medic fatigues. Instead of their pack returning, it seems the colonial forces instead have issued a compact stretcher that assists in carrying off casualties too wounded to even move from the field. In the real world during the World Wars, soldiers were assigned or in some cases volunteered as stretcher bearers to work with the medical specialists in cleaning the field of the wounded to triage as swiftly as possible to increase the chance of survival. A side note here, this is going to look amusing watching players still fire and carry wounded around with this thing on their back. Other things added now are the white cloth marked heavy pouches around the hips like with the Warden Medic to ease the burden of carrying medical supplies. The most noticeable item on this uniform of course though is the white painted helmet. This is the first painted helmet of Foxo, and like the pack cover for the Wardens, it is donated by a green cross on the front for identification purposes. General conclusions. For the most part, these medical uniforms now make those in the healing role much easier to find on a crowded front line in the game, but I feel I can make a few more suggestions to make it even easier for players. First and most obvious now, to the surprise of many of us, why this isn't a thing, painting the Warden Medic helmet at least white. White helmets were until recently displayed in the game's intro screen, so the absence seems, well, rather weird. A general suggestion for both units is a slate grey or white cloth or leather jerkin that they can be wearing over the front of their uniforms to stand out even more in a crowd. I would also suggest the British Army jerkin once again as an example. I also feel perhaps sneaking in a set of medical crutches behind the Warden pack would give them a little bit more of their own identical flair and be a nice touch as well, sort of how the Battlefield 1 medic class did it. This is perhaps the one time a different coloured sort of shoulder cape mantle thing would be useful for a Colonial soldier, obviously coloured white like the rest of the medical covers. But yes, that is more or less it for the medical uniforms now. Thank you, and always stay on the right side of the road. You don't want to get hurt and cause even more stress to the medics now, yeah?